The moment you disappear from someone's life, a silent war begins inside their mind, an invisible battle that unfolds not in hours, but across days, weeks, and sometimes months. This absence isn't empty space, it's a powerful force that triggers deep, often unconscious shifts in their emotions, thoughts, and identity. They don't just miss you, they're forced to reckon with your void, and in that reckoning, their entire internal world is upended. Understanding these key psychological landmarks is crucial because it reveals the raw mechanics of how absence breaks attachment patterns, ignites obsession or clarity, and either traps them in pain or pushes them toward growth. This is not about manipulation. It's about mastering emotional reality with stoic precision, knowing how silence shapes minds and hearts over time. Today, we will journey through those pivotal moments, starting with the shock of day one, moving through the chaos of 2 weeks, and arriving at the profound transformations that happen after 8 weeks and beyond. This knowledge arms you with clarity and control over the unseen effects of disappearance, turning absence from weakness into strategic power. If you truly want to grasp why they think about you long after you vanish and how that shapes everything between you, then this is the deep dive you can't miss. At the very first moment of your disappearance, within day 1 and 2, their mind is gripped by shock and denial, a raw primal response to sudden loss that refuses to accept reality. This initial fracture in their emotional world is marked by confusion and disbelief. The absence feels surreal, as if it's a temporary glitch rather than a permanent shift. Their brain instinctively seeks to reverse the loss, hoping that you will reappear, messaging will come through, or some explanation will surface to undo the void. During this phase, they cling tightly to past moments, replaying conversations and memories as a desperate attempt to anchor themselves to familiarity. This denial is a defense mechanism, a psychological shield that prevents the full weight of abandonment from crashing down all at once. Even if they sense something is wrong, their emotional system resists accepting it, trying instead to maintain control by minimizing the impact and preserving hope. This early stage sets the tone for everything that follows. Their emotional landscape is raw, unsteady, and vulnerable, but not yet broken. It's the moment when absence first cracks open their attachment, planting the seed of longing that will either grow into obsession or fuel eventual clarity and strength. Understanding this stage means recognizing how powerful the mind's refusal to lose truly is, and how critical it is for you to hold your own calm and presence as the silent force in their chaos. As you move into the 3rd to 5th day after your disappearance, their mind plunges into a storm of obsessive replaying and emotional turmoil where memories no longer serve as comfort, but as a relentless echo chamber of longing and pain. Every word, gesture, and moment between you becomes magnified, dissected endlessly in their mind with a feverish intensity that disrupts any semblance of calm or rationality. This is the phase where emotional addiction takes hold. The brain's craving for connection triggers dopamine cycles similar to withdrawal, making them mentally tethered to your absence even more tightly than before. They oscillate between craving contact and fearing rejection, trapped in an internal tug-of-war that feeds anxiety, confusion, and despair. This emotional chaos is exhausting and disorienting, but also incredibly revealing. It exposes the depth of attachment and the unresolved emotional debts that your silence has activated. Their nervous system is flooded with unresolved tension, and every small trigger, whether a song, place, or random thought, can spiral into overwhelming emotional waves. This phase is pivotal because it is where they truly realize the magnitude of your absence, yet lack the clarity or tools to process it healthily. If you watch carefully, this turbulent period is a window into their raw emotional dependency, but also the moment where you, by maintaining your own stoic calm, begin to shift the power dynamic. Your silence becomes a mirror reflecting their need, and in that reflection lies your control. By the time 1 week has passed, their emotional storm begins to show first signs of fracture. This is when longing starts to collide with growing frustration, confusion, and a deepening internal conflict. The initial shock and obsession evolve into a more complex psychological battle where they begin questioning why you disappeared, wrestling with feelings of betrayal and helplessness. The raw pain starts to mix with anger, sometimes directed inward, sometimes outward, and the push-pull dynamic intensifies. This tension creates a volatile emotional environment where impulses to reach out and reconnect clash fiercely with defensive instincts to protect themselves from further hurt. It's a fragile phase marked by wavering decisions. They might attempt to break the silence with messages or calls, or alternatively, retreat further into avoidance and emotional shutdown. This vacillation reveals the deep confusion and lack of control they feel, highlighting how your absence has disrupted their internal equilibrium. At this stage, they are desperate to restore balance, but unsure how, and every thought about you is laced with complexity, part yearning, part resentment, part fear. The 1 week mark is a psychological crossroads where unresolved emotions risk turning into toxic cycles unless they develop awareness or you maintain unwavering presence through your silence. This moment is crucial because it's where the narrative can either spiral into chaos or begin shifting towards clarity, depending on how both parties navigate the tension of absence and desire. Around the 2 week mark, their mind begins to shift from raw emotion into a more calculated realm of rationalization and mental storytelling, a psychological survival mechanism designed to soften the pain and make sense of your disappearance. At this point, the emotional upheaval has settled enough for their intellect to engage, yet the heart remains unsettled, creating a tension between logic and feeling that fuels complex internal narratives. They start constructing stories, some flattering, some self-protective, that explain your absence in ways that reduce their sense of vulnerability and preserve their ego. These mental storytelling serve as both a shield and a trap. They prevent full emotional collapse by offering control through explanation, but they also keep them tethered to unresolved feelings and prevent true closure. They may convince themselves that you are busy, confused, or struggling with their own issues, rather than facing the possibility that your absence is deliberate and final. This phase is marked by restless mental activity, rumination, what-if fantasies, and strategic analysis, while emotional pain simmers beneath the surface. For you, understanding this stage means that recognizing that their silence or distance doesn't equate to indifference. Rather, they are engaged in a covert battle between accepting loss and clinging to hope. Your continued absence becomes a psychological puzzle they obsessively try to solve, and this is where your calm detachment can deepen their internal unrest, subtly shifting power back into your hands.
By the 3rd week, their focus turns sharply inward, igniting a deep phase of self-reflection and blame, where the absence you created forces them to confront not only your disappearance, but their own role in the dynamic. This stage is often brutal because it strips away illusions and forces them to wrestle with uncomfortable truths about their vulnerabilities, insecurities, and unmet needs. They begin dissecting past behaviors, searching for faults in themselves, whether real or imagined, hoping to understand what caused the break and if they could have prevented it. This self-scrutiny can be both corrosive and clarifying, as it shakes their emotional foundation and confronts their sense of worth and identity. The pain of abandonment becomes entangled with guilt and regret, creating a potent mixture that can either catalyze growth or deepen despair. At this point, the absence is no longer just about missing you. It's about grappling with the loss of stability, control, and the emotional scaffolding you provided. They may cycle through anger at themselves and sorrow for the lost connection, while silently wishing for a second chance or clarity that might never come. This period of intense internal reckoning is critical because it determines whether they become trapped in toxic patterns of blame and victimhood or begin the painful but necessary process of emotional maturation. From your perspective, maintaining stoic calm and emotional distance here is essential. Any sign of weakness or desperation on your part risks unraveling their fragile self-assessment and resets the cycle of dependency. By the 1-month mark, the initial chaos begins to morph into a deeper psychological transformation, where their emotional defenses either harden or start to soften depending on their resilience and mindset. This is a pivotal crossroads where the raw pain of absence either calcifies into bitterness and stubborn denial or evolves into acceptance and inner clarity. Some will double down on resentment, erecting walls to shield themselves from further hurt, while others start to recognize the value of the distance, the freedom it offers to reevaluate not only the relationship, but their own needs, boundaries, and desires. This stage is marked by a growing awareness of personal responsibility and the limits of control. They begin to understand that no amount of chasing or pleading can change what has been broken without mutual effort. The emotional roller coaster stabilizes, replaced by a quieter, more reflective state where thoughts about you are less frantic and more measured, often tinged with a bittersweet mix of nostalgia and wisdom. However, this clarity is fragile and easily disrupted by external triggers, messages, memories, or social proof that can reignite old wounds or spark hope anew. For you, this period is a test of patience and strategic restraint, as your absence becomes the mirror reflecting their true emotional state and readiness to move forward or regress. Around the 6-week mark, something profound begins to happen. Their emotional system, once in disarray, starts to confront the permanence of your absence, and this often triggers an identity-level crisis where the loss is no longer just about you, but about the version of themselves that existed in your presence. This is the phase where they feel the weight of the void not just emotionally, but existentially. They start to realize that the version of them who was loved, wanted, validated, or even challenged by you is now gone, suspended in time, with no outlet to return to. This loss of identity becomes a quiet ache that follows them into everyday life. Simple routines begin to feel empty, laughter lacks depth, and moments that once felt shared now feel hollow. It is no longer about missing messages or phone calls. It's about missing the reflection of who they were with you. They begin to feel like a ghost in their own life, surrounded by people but untouched, engaged in activities but detached. Because your absence is no longer a pause, it's a redefinition. For many, this is the most painful point, not because they're overwhelmed by sadness, but because they're finally still. The emotional noise has faded enough for the truth to echo. They are not the same without you. This realization is where deep longing is born, the kind of longing that isn't loud or impulsive, but quiet, enduring, and harder to escape. And in that silence, your presence becomes more powerful than it ever was when you were near, because now you live in their memory as a standard, a mystery, a symbol of something they can't quite reach or replace. By the 2-month mark, the psychological shift is complete. Their mind no longer searches for quick resolution or emotional rescue, but instead loops through a slow, haunting realization that you may never return, and that thought alone carries more weight than they ever expected to bear. This is where your absence stops feeling temporary and begins to calcify into permanence. And with that, a new layer of emotional gravity settles in. Regret matures here. It's not just about what they did or didn't say. It's about the choices they made when they still had access to you. The moments they dismissed, the words they withheld, the vulnerability they resisted, all of it now plays like a silent film in their mind, looped endlessly, not as entertainment, but as consequence. They start to notice how much quieter life is without the depth your presence added, how surface level their other connections feel, how difficult it is to replace the emotional imprint you left. And in that stillness, they begin to feel the true meaning of emotional debt, the cost of what was mishandled, the weight of what was taken for granted. They may try to reconnect subtly, through small gestures or indirect messages, but the undertone is clear. They no longer feel in control. You have become mythologized in their mind, not because of manipulation, but because your silence forced them to confront who they are without you. Whether they admit it or not, their nervous system remembers. The impact wasn't in what you said, it was in what you withheld. And now, the silence speaks louder than anything they thought would be final. By the 3-month point, your absence no longer functions as a reaction. It becomes a new reality they must live with, and the emotional architecture of their life starts to rebuild around that void. This is where the internal conflict reaches its most fragile and revealing stage. Part of them desperately wants to move on, to reclaim a sense of power, routine, and self-sufficiency. But another part quietly clings to your ghost, not out of obsession, but because your emotional fingerprint remains embedded in the places no one else can reach. At this point, they've likely gone through waves of denial, anger, regret, and forced indifference, but the ache has outlived all those strategies. It's not always visible or dramatic anymore. It shows up in quieter ways, in moments of silence before sleep, in the pause between messages that don't satisfy, in the eyes that search for someone who feels like you, but never quite lands. They start to question whether the connection they had with you was rare or if they simply imagined its depth. Yet that uncertainty only draws them deeper into reflection. This phase is powerful because it doesn't just haunt them, it humbles them. They see, often for the first time, that losing you wasn't just an event, it was a reckoning. And even if they appear composed on the surface, the internal terrain has changed. They now move with a cautiousness that didn't exist before, because your absence became the teacher they couldn't ignore. The lesson was silent, but permanent. And no matter who enters their life from this point forward, there will always be a part of them comparing it to what was lost when you walked away. Not because you were perfect, but because your absence finally showed them what real presence costs. By month 4 or beyond, when the emotional silence has carved deep grooves into their psyche and the initial defenses have long worn thin, many begin to quietly resurface, not with full vulnerability or dramatic confessions, but with subtle, strategic moves designed to test the waters without fully exposing themselves. This return is rarely straightforward. It comes disguised as casual check-ins, random likes, vague messages, or seemingly innocent conversations that feel more like emotional sonar, designed to detect whether your heart is still open or fully fortified. They might ask about your life under the guise of curiosity, but what they're really measuring is emotional temperature. Do you still care? Do you still remember? Is the door truly closed? This reappearance isn't about immediate reconciliation. It's about regaining access to emotional control, about validating that they still matter even after everything. And though it might look like courage on the surface, it's often rooted in fear. The fear that they've truly lost something they can't replace, and the quiet terror that you might have evolved beyond their reach. This is where your power is most pronounced, not in how you respond, but in what you choose to withhold. If you meet their return with the same calm strength that defined your absence, it sends a silent message that you're no longer where they left you. That the silence didn't just punish them, it transformed you. And now, if they want access, they must return not as a manipulator or wanderer, but as someone ready to face the cost of everything they once dismissed. The truth is, when you disappear with discipline, when you detach without theatrics and hold your silence like a blade, it rewires everything. They expected weakness, they expected reaction, but instead they got distance, they got evolution, they got a version of you they can't predict or control. And now every message they don't send, every call they hesitate to make, every memory that stings a little deeper at night is shaped by the power of your absence. But here's what matters most. This journey was never about them. It was about you reclaiming your peace, mastering your emotions, and proving that you don't need chaos to feel alive. You need clarity. You don't chase what runs, you attract what's real by becoming untouchable. And in doing so, you flip the script. Not with anger, not with games, but with quiet dominance. So if they return, let them meet the version of you who no longer needs the validation, who doesn't bleed for closure, who moved forward and never looked back. Because in the end, the most unforgettable person isn't the loudest. It's the one who walked away with dignity and never broke their silence. If you found strength in this, drop a comment, share your story, and subscribe. There's more coming for those ready to rise in silence and rebuild from power.